So, you want to own a school, buy a few acres of prime real estate, erect a state-of-the-art building, hire a slate of passionate educators, and watch five-figure tuition checks roll into your bank account like clockwork every single month for the next 30 years. Thousands of kids in crisp navy uniforms, a waiting list stretching down the block, and the bulletproof prestige of being a pillar in your community. On paper, it looks like the closest thing to a guaranteed cash machine that exists in American commercial real estate. Here is the brutal truth. Almost none of that romantic picture is true. And the tiny fraction that is true is infinitely more unforgiving than it looks from the drop-off line. What you are actually signing up for isn't just an educational institute. It is a hyper-complex, high-leverage business that mashes together large-scale real estate development, high-volume human resource management, predatory municipal zoning, high-stakes consumer psychology, and a single-family customer acquisition lifecycle that spans up to 12 years. Some operators who master this game become exceptionally wealthy. Others lose every single dollar of equity they put in, and they lose it agonizingly slowly, in a process that looks completely healthy right up until the exact moment the doors are padlocked by federal creditors. So, let's strip away the marketing brochures and dissect this business piece by piece, exactly the way an elite Wall Street analyst or a distressed asset operator sees it. Before we open the balance sheet, we need to establish what kind of school we are actually dissecting. The funding model changes every single law of physics in this business. Public schools run on tax dollars, meaning a district superintendent never lies awake at night, wondering if next week's enrollment covers Friday's payroll. Parochial and religious schools rely heavily on church subsidies and donor endowments to soft-land their operational shortfalls. International boarding schools cater to ultra-high-net-worth global elites who wouldn't bat an eye at a tuition hike. Franchise networks shave off gross top-line revenue for corporate headquarters in exchange for a standardized operating system. But the purest, most unforgiving version of this business, the version where 100% of the financial risk rests squarely on a single owner's shoulders, is the independent, standalone private school. That is the arena where margins are paper-thin and mistakes are catastrophic. The scale of this industry is staggering. Combined K-12 education in the United States represents a massive $634 billion annual market. Private institutions educate roughly 11 million students nationwide, standing alongside nearly 63 million in the public system. It is a behemoth industry, hiding behind local, personal, and deceptively tranquil storefronts. A school does not begin with a chalkboard, a curriculum, or an inspiring principle. It begins with dirt. And that single real estate acquisition decision can drive you into Chapter 11 bankruptcy before a single student ever sits at a desk. In a primary American metropolitan market, securing a usable parcel large enough to support a full K-12 campus classrooms, athletic facilities, parking capacity, and outdoor recreational space easily demands millions of dollars before a single foundation is poured. Push outward into the secondary suburban rings, and your cost per acre drops significantly, sometimes by 50% or more. But you haven't saved money. You've simply swapped hard capital outlay for geographic friction. Every mile you retreat from the affluent zip codes where families can actually afford $25,000 in annual out-of-pocket tuition is a mile that materializes later as an expensive bus route, an unsustainable daily commute, and an affluent parent quietly deciding that the competitor across town is simply more convenient. Right out of the gate, before hiring a single teacher or drafting a single lesson plan, you are forced to choose between two ruinous options: pay an exorbitant premium for land right next to your target demographic, or buy cheap dirt on the periphery and spend the next decade fighting the law of distance. And the purchase price of the dirt is only half the battle. The far more dangerous variable is municipal entitlement and zoning law. Local zoning boards dictate whether a property can legally host an educational institution. Securing a conditional use permit or a complete rezoning designation routinely devolves into a grueling 12 to 24-month battle involving public hearings, environmental reviews, traffic impact studies, and vocal neighborhood resistance groups objecting to drop-off congestion. A property that appears to be a bargain on a commercial real estate listing can quietly morph into a financial drain. While your land use attorneys fight municipal boards over zoning applications that may ultimately be denied, you are stuck servicing the carrying costs, paying high-interest debt service and property taxes on a completely unproductive piece of dirt. Now, let's assume you secured your land, navigated the planning commission, and received your development approvals. Building an actual educational facility bears zero resemblance to residential or standard commercial construction, and the hard capital expenditure reflects that instantly. According to national construction data tracked by industry cost estimators, constructing a new K-12 educational facility in the United States ranges between $230 and nearly $600 per square foot, dictated heavily by regional labor markets, seismic requirements, and municipal building codes. Secondary markets like Nashville sit near the lower boundary of that curve, while Tier 1 urban metros like New York City, San Francisco, and Chicago push straight toward the ceiling. Broken down by facility type, a standard elementary school averages roughly $300 per square foot. Middle schools climb to $325 per square foot. High schools, which demand specialized science laboratories, expanded athletic complexes, and vocational spaces, average roughly $360 per square foot nationally. In a mid-tier suburban market, a modest 75,000 square foot elementary school, built at a baseline rate of $385 per square foot, commands a hard construction budget of nearly $29 million. Slide that exact same facility into California or the Northeast with strict seismic codes and prevailing union labor wages, and that capital expenditure figure rapidly escalates past $60 million. If you step up to a comprehensive 250,000 to 400,000 square foot high school campus, construction costs alone easily range from $100 million to $200 million, before land acquisition, interior fit-outs, or operational overhead. And that only covers baseline academic structures. Specialized auxiliary spaces carry terrifying price tags. A combined cafeteria and assembly hall known in the industry as a cafetorium adds between $1.7 million and $4 million to the bill. A competition-grade gymnasium, equipped with spectator bleachers, wood flooring, and locker facilities, adds another $5 million to $13 million. Advanced STEM laboratories require specialized HVAC ventilation systems, gas lines, emergency eyewash stations, and chemical storage. Add in media centers, campus-wide fire suppression systems, emergency backup generators, perimeter security infrastructure, and ADA-compliant elevators, and your baseline estimates explode. On top of the primary general construction contract, developers must account for soft costs, furniture, fixtures and equipment, FF&E, low-voltage IT cabling, architectural design fees, structural engineering, and municipal permit reviews. Soft costs routinely consume an additional 18% to 25% of the total project expenditure. On a $50 million hard construction build, soft costs represent an additional $9 million to $12.5 million in cash that never appears in the headline construction quotes. Consider a real-world public school district in the American Midwest that illustrates this exact trap. Taxpayers approved a $48 million bond allocation for a new elementary facility. By the time design development wrapped up 2 years later, updated construction estimates hit nearly $60 million, creating an $11.5 million deficit before a single spade touched the soil. That shortfall didn't stem from financial fraud or administrative incompetence. It was driven by simple economic reality. The 2 years required to finalize architectural plans were 2 years during which structural steel, concrete, diesel, and skilled trades inflated. The district was forced to execute frantic value engineering over 11 weeks, making 14 separate structural compromises, switching from a 2-story layout to a single-story slab, replacing premium terrazzo flooring with polished concrete, and downgrading custom mechanical systems to standard off-the-shelf HVAC units just to force the budget back down to match the approved bond figure. This is the foundational trap of school development. The initial capital estimate in your business plan is never what you actually pay. Construction inflation waits for no one, rising over 15% nationally in recent 3-year cycles. A development plan that pencils out seamlessly on day one can easily be underwater by the time the foundation is set. Even when your general contractor hands over the keys to an immaculate, fully fitted $50 million facility, you still cannot open your doors. A physical school building without regulatory sign-off is legally worthless. Before a single student sets foot inside a classroom, you must secure fire marshal sign-offs, health department clearance for food prep and water systems, State Department of Education, curriculum authorization, and credential verification for every teaching staff member. Depending on your jurisdiction, you may also require special educational occupancy permits and undergo mandatory regulatory waiting periods before you are legally permitted to market enrollment. Regional accreditation, critical for families seeking college placement credibility, frequently demands an entire academic year of operational self-study and peer review before approval is granted. If you miss a single compliance item, you do not receive a gentle warning. You receive a cease and desist order, and facing an operational shutdown after financing a $50 million facility is one of the most expensive blunders in American entrepreneurship. Every month your campus opening is delayed by a missing municipal permit is a month where your debt service continues to compound. Your newly hired faculty are collecting full paychecks with 0 students to teach, and your marketing burn rate is consuming capital reserves. Delay a scheduled September opening into November, and you haven't just lost 8 weeks of revenue, you have burned the entire academic year. Very few parents will pull their child mid-semester to enroll in an unproven new institution. Now let's examine the revenue side of the ledger. Most people assume a private school makes its money exclusively from tuition payments. While tuition serves as the core engine representing 70% to 90% of total revenue, it is far from the whole machine. Sophisticated school operators construct a multi-layered revenue stack. First, non-refundable application and testing fees, ranging from $150 to $500 per prospective student, are collected upfront regardless of admission outcomes. Once accepted, annual registration and technology fees cover digital infrastructure, lab consumables, and standardized assessment platforms. Exclusive licensing agreements with uniform manufacturers yield retail markups on mandatory apparel. Transportation represents an independent recurring monthly fee for families utilizing campus bus networks. Cafeteria operations either generate direct food sales margins or are leased to private catering vendors for fixed rent, plus a percentage of gross revenues. Crucially, after the final afternoon bell rings, classrooms, athletic fields, and auditoriums are monetized through after-school sports academies, music programs, specialized tutoring, and summer camps, squeezing operational yield out of real estate assets that would otherwise sit vacant for half the day and entirely idle for 3 summer months. Layer these ancillary streams together, and the customer lifetime value of an enrolled student expands dramatically. A family paying $15,000 in baseline sticker tuition can realistically generate an additional $1,000 to $3,000 annually in auxiliary spend revenue that carries near zero. Incremental delivery costs since the bus fleet, kitchen facilities, and gymnasiums are already capitalized. This brings us to the unique psychology of setting tuition prices. In standard economics, lowering prices expands demand. In elite private education, tuition frequently behaves as a Veblen good, a luxury item where elevated pricing directly signals superior quality, academic exclusivity, and social prestige. Data from the National Association of Independent Schools, NAIS, shows that median day school tuition for member institutions sits near $30,000 per year, up from $14,600 2 decades ago. far outpacing general CPI inflation. Elite boarding prep schools routinely command over $60,000 annually. Geographic variance is stark. Average private tuition in states like Kansas or Kentucky hovers around $10,000 per year, whereas Connecticut, driven by concentrated wealth, boasts state averages approaching $29,000. It is the exact same fundamental service on paper, yet carries a 300% price differential dictated almost entirely by regional wealth concentration, local brand perception, and competitive positioning. Consequently, slashing tuition is often the most fatal strategic move a struggling private school can make. Prospective parents rarely perceive a tuition cut as a value proposition. They interpret it as a distress signal, a sign that the institution is struggling to attract top faculty or wealthy families. To navigate this dynamic, smart operators execute a high-sticker, high-aid strategy. They maintain an inflated headline tuition price to preserve brand equity, while quietly issuing targeted financial aid discounts behind closed doors to fill specific seats. Across NAE's member schools, over 25% of enrolled students receive financial assistance, with median grants exceeding $22,000 for day schools and $35,000 for boarding facilities. This allows administrators to protect their elite pricing power in public marketing while quietly competing on price on a family-by-family basis behind closed doors. Now, let's look at the central variable that determines whether an independent school survives or collapses: capacity utilization. A private school operates on an extreme fixed cost structure. The lease or mortgage payment, administrative overhead, utility baseline, facility insurance, and core faculty payroll remain completely fixed, whether a classroom contains 30 students or 15. Let's run the exact operational math from the perspective of a school CFO. Suppose a mid-sized private school sets a headline sticker tuition of $15,000 per student. After factoring in an average 15% financial aid discount, net tuition yields $12,750. Add $750 per student in net auxiliary margin from transportation, food services, and summer programs. Then subtract $1,200 per student in variable direct costs, textbooks, consumable classroom supplies, software licenses, and individual utility usage. This leaves a net marginal contribution of $12,300 per enrolled student. Now, assume the school's fixed operating burden debt service, administrative salaries, facility maintenance, property insurance, and baseline faculty contracts totals $3,690,000 annually. To find the break-even point, divide the fixed operating cost by the net marginal contribution per student. $3,690,000 divided by $12,300 equals exactly 300 students. If the physical campus has a total design capacity of 400 seats, watch how rapidly the bottom line fluctuates as enrollment shifts. At 100% capacity, 400 students, the school generates a healthy operational surplus of roughly $1.53 million. At 87.5% capacity, 350 students, the net surplus drops to $615,000. At 75% capacity, 300 students, the school hits its precise break-even mark: zero net profit, zero financial buffer. At 62.5% capacity, 250 students, the school bleeds $615,000 in net annual losses, forcing management to draw down cash reserves or take on bridge debt. At 50% capacity, 200 students, the annual cash deficit inflates to $1.23 million, an operational burn rate that will bankrupt an independent institution within 12 to 24 months. Notice the mathematical asymmetry. The drop from full capacity to 87% capacity compresses margins, but the transition from 75% down to 62% shifts the enterprise from operational health into severe insolvency. This is why seasoned education operators monitor the capacity utilization rate obsessively, targeting an operational sweet spot between 75% and 85%. Running at 90% plus capacity may look like a triumph to admissions, but to the Finance Committee, it presents a hidden vulnerability. There is zero operational slack to absorb an unexpected drop in re-enrollment during an economic downturn. What drives those relentless fixed costs that refuse to shrink when enrollment drops? Labor. Education is an inherently labor-intensive industry that resists automation. National operating data across independent schools reveals that personnel expenses, instructional salaries, administrative pay, health benefits, retirement contributions, and payroll taxes consistently devour between 70% and 90% of a school's total operating budget. Direct instructional payroll consumes roughly 53% to 63% of every tuition dollar. Mandatory payroll taxes and employee benefits claim another 12% to 13%. That leaves less than 30% of gross tuition revenue to service debt, maintain physical plant infrastructure, update classroom technology, and cover insurance premiums. Yet, here is a fascinating dynamic. According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, private school teachers earn less on average than their public school peers. Median annual compensation for a private elementary school educator hovers around $47,500 compared to roughly $61,800 in the public system. Private high school instructors average $56,500 versus $62,000 for public high school teachers. This compensation gap exists because public education relies on state licensing structures and union-negotiated tenure pay scales, whereas private institutions set their own hiring requirements and rarely operate under union contracts. While elite prep schools pay experienced faculty over $100,000 to poach talent from public systems, the broader private education model partially relies on teachers accepting lower compensation in exchange for smaller class sizes, greater instructional autonomy, and safer working environments. This brings us to the student-to-teacher ratio, a metric that serves as a school's most powerful marketing asset and its greatest operational risk. Parents naturally prefer low student-to-teacher ratios. An 8-to-1 ratio sounds infinitely more attractive than 2-to-1. But every student you remove from a classroom without a corresponding increase in tuition directly compresses your gross operating margin. Financial benchmarking studies comparing profitable schools against distressed institutions highlight a subtle but decisive metric gap. Solvent schools average roughly 4.6 students per total employee and 7.3 students per instructional teacher. Insolvent or deficit-running schools average 4.3 students per employee and 6.7 per teacher. That minor variance on paper represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in compounding payroll burden across a full faculty roster. A school marketing an aggressive 8-to-1 ratio is structurally locking its finance department into an uphill margin battle that can only be sustained if tuition pricing sits at the absolute top of the market. Beyond classroom teachers, a functional campus requires non-instructional administrative overhead, a head of school, division directors, admissions officers, a CFO, registrar personnel, student counselors, campus nurses, IT specialists, and facilities staff. None of these roles directly generate tuition revenue, yet all represent fixed overhead costs that exist whether campus capacity sits at 40% or 95%. Now let's examine an operational reality that catches first-time operators off guard: the summer cash burn. When the final bell rings in June and students leave for summer break, operational expenses do not pause. Campus security forces must operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Commercial HVAC systems cannot simply be powered down for 10 weeks without inviting mold growth, interior humidity damage, and structural degradation, meaning climate control runs continuously at reduced but substantial expense. Enterprise software subscriptions, learning management systems, LMS, administrative databases, security suites, and accounting platforms bill continuously on 12-month contract cycles. Senior administrators, facilities, directors, and finance teams operate on year-round employment contracts. Meanwhile, yellow bus fleets parked in lot facilities still demand routine maintenance, regulatory safety inspections, and insurance coverage ahead of the fall term. A school does not operate on 8 months of expenses and 4 months of hibernation. It absorbs 12 months of fixed operational expenses against roughly 9 months of primary tuition inflows. This structural mismatch is why competent school operators treat liquid cash reserves as a mandatory solvency buffer rather than an optional surplus. Best-in-class operators collect tuition in advance through structured annual, biannual, or monthly automated ACH payment schedules specifically designed to bridge the summer deficit. A school maintaining 3 to 6 months of operating expenses in reserve can comfortably navigate summer cash drains. An operator running on razor-thin reserves is a single delayed vendor payment or tuition default away from a severe liquidity crisis. Consider another deceptively complex expense line item: student transportation. The average U.S. school district spends between $1,100 and $1,545 annually per student on transit services, a figure that has escalated over 27% over the past decade. A single full-sized commercial school bus demands a capital purchase price between $40,000 and $150,000, while annual fleet maintenance averages $5,500 per vehicle before fuel, commercial insurance, or driver compensation. Rural and low-density operators face severe geographic penalties, where the marginal cost of transporting a student runs up to 2.5 times higher than in dense urban environments. Private school operators are forced to make a difficult operational choice: capitalize and manage an internal bus fleet while absorbing fleet liability, or outsource transportation to third-party contractors and pay marked-up service margins. And in a national labor market where licensed school bus driver availability has dropped by over 15%, simply recruiting qualified personnel represents an ongoing operational bottleneck. Add to this the expanding burden of institutional liability insurance. A school carries strict legal responsibility for the physical safety of hundreds of minors for 8 hours a day across campus grounds, transit routes, and off-site excursions. This mandates comprehensive general liability coverage, commercial property coverage on multi-million-dollar real estate assets, vehicle fleet insurance, umbrella liability policies, and increasingly, cyber liability coverage to protect against ransomware attacks targeting sensitive student financial and medical records. A single unbacked liability claim can instantly erase an independent school's entire annual net operating surplus. Similarly, educational technology has transitioned from a competitive advantage to a baseline capital requirement. The global K-12 edtech market sits at over $45 billion and is projected to expand past $325 billion over the next decade. Modern private schools are expected to maintain enterprise LMS platforms, supply individual student hardware devices, costing $325 to $485 per unit on 2 to 3 year replacement cycles, and integrate AI-driven personalized learning tools. This tech spend feeds directly into customer acquisition and retention costs. Because private education markets are intensely competitive, institutions can no longer rely purely on word-of-mouth marketing. Modern admissions departments track Silicon Valley-style metrics: student acquisition cost, SAC, weighed against the lifetime value LTV of an enrolled family. If a school expends $1,200 in targeted digital marketing and admissions overhead to enroll a new kindergarten student who remains enrolled for 6 years at $15,000 in net annual tuition, that family represents an LTV of $90,000, a 7.5-to-1 return on acquisition spend. But if that family withdraws after year 1 due to operational dissatisfaction, the unit economics collapse. This reality makes retention, not raw acquisition, the true driver of financial sustainability. Improving annual retention rates by just 5% yields a far greater impact on net operating margin than launching an aggressive new student recruitment drive, because retained families carry zero incremental acquisition expense. An institution's ultimate intangible asset is its brand reputation, an asset that builds slowly over decades but can be erased overnight. A pristine academic reputation supports elevated sticker tuition, deep waiting lists, and the ability to attract top teaching talent even at below-market salaries. But that brand equity can be severely compromised by a single public scandal, safety failure, or administrative misstep. In an era dominated by parent forums, social media, and digital review platforms, negative publicity spreads rapidly to prospective families long before institutional PR teams can intervene. To see how these underlying economic mechanics play out at scale, let's analyze two contrasting expansion strategies in modern American private education. Both attempted to build multi-campus national networks. One resulted in a sudden Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing, while the other built an expansive, highly profitable private equity platform. Consider Higher Ground Education. Founded in Southern California, Higher Ground built its core strategy around Guidepost Montessori, a network that scaled rapidly from 12 campuses in 2018 to over 100 locations across multiple countries by 2022. On paper, it looked like a tech-enabled, hyper-scalable model designed to capture surging parental demand for Montessori early childhood education. Backed by venture capital and private equity investors, Higher Ground aggressively rolled out new campuses across suburban markets nationwide, treating school expansion much like a corporate coffee chain, opening new storefronts. The operational reality caught up with the company. In the summer of 2025, Higher Ground Education officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in federal court. Outgoing leadership acknowledged in public filings that in their aggressive pursuit of rapid scale, they had overextended their balance sheet, expanding the campus network far beyond what operational cash flows could sustain. Nearly one-third of the entire network was shut down almost overnight. In Denver alone, 5 campuses ceased operations with minimal notice, forcing families with infant and toddler care to scramble for alternative arrangements. Court filings revealed over $13 million owed to a single primary financial creditor, alongside $1.5 million in unpaid rent obligations to landlords and hundreds of thousands more due to local operational vendors. Why did a national network collapse when individual school balance sheets looked viable on venture pitch decks? Because education real estate does not scale like software. Every single new campus location requires a long-term commercial real estate lease, new municipal licensing approvals, a full local staff build-out, and a brand new multi-year enrollment ramp curve. Remember our break-even analysis. A new school facility requires roughly 75% capacity utilization just to cover its fixed costs. Bringing a newly opened campus from 0 to 75% capacity typically demands 3 to 5 years of localized brand building and community trust. By opening new greenfield campuses faster than existing locations could reach financial maturity, Higher Ground compounding its fixed operating liabilities across the network while consolidated revenues lagged far behind break-even thresholds. Operational disagreements regarding whether to continue hyperscaling or pause to consolidate led to executive departures prior to the restructuring filing. Now, contrast Higher Ground's trajectory with a completely different multi-campus platform, Spring Education Group. Spring Education Group approached expansion from the opposite operational angle. Instead of opening unproven greenfield campuses from scratch and waiting years for enrollment to ramp, Spring grew almost exclusively by acquiring already established, historically profitable private school brands with deep local roots. Starting in 2017, backed by private equity firm Barings and later acquired by Primavera Capital Group, Spring acquired market-leading brands, including Stratford School, Lament Montessori, Nobel Learning Communities, and basis-independent schools. When Spring absorbed Nobel Learning alone, it instantly acquired 25,000 enrolled students across 190 functional campuses. Spring wasn't betting on speculative future enrollment growth. It was purchasing existing high-margin cash flows from campuses that had already cleared their initial break-even curves years prior. Today, Spring Education Group operates roughly 200 campuses across 19 states and international markets. Despite navigating credit adjustments during broader macroeconomic shifts, the network continues to generate substantial operating cash flow. Place these two strategies side by side, and the underlying lesson becomes clear. Higher Ground tried to manufacture campus maturity on credit, expanding unproven capacity faster than unit economics could settle. Spring Education Group bought mature capacity that had already proven its financial viability. Both consolidated a fragmented private education market, but one built on debt-fueled expansion speculative greenfields, while the other acquired proven cash-flowing assets. Owning an independent school is not an impossible business, but it is an unforgiving one. It demands an operator who can simultaneously navigate commercial real estate development, complex municipal zoning, regulatory compliance, tight payroll management, and long-term customer psychology. If you treat a school as a passive, high-margin real estate play, the underlying unit economics, the fixed cost burden, the capacity utilization curve, the summer cash burn, and the regulatory complexity will systematically dismantle your capital. The operators who succeed in this space do not succeed by accident. They succeed because they understand that behind every inspiring classroom and every polished admissions brochure lies a razor-sharp financial machine, one where every square foot, every teacher ratio, and every enrolled seat represents the difference between sustainable operational surplus and rapid insolvency.